Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Vanessa if you are new here. Now, as Catholics, many of our beliefs get questioned. I mean, that's no question itself. A lot of our beliefs cause uproar or questions, and this is typically due to misunderstanding. But one question that Catholics get a lot is, do you worship the saints? A lot of people seem to believe that Catholics worship the saints. Now, many Catholics, even ones that are not really versed in apologetics, are typically able to answer this question by saying, no, Catholics don't worship the saints, and by saying that we simply venerate the saints, that we look at the saints as role models of people who live lives for Christ and how we wish to live our lives like theirs. And if we have a statue or a photo of them in our house, it is simply just like having a photo of your grandmother. However, these explanations should be sufficient enough. Some people still have a little bit of uneasiness when they come to venerating the saints. They don't understand why Catholics do this. So in this week's video, we'll basically be answering the question about should we venerate the saints, and if scripture teaches us to venerate the saints, and a little bit of an explanation as to why Catholics do certain things when they venerate the saints. So if you're looking for a video about do Catholics worship the saints, or do Catholics pray to the saints, or should they pray to the saints, this is not what this video is going to be. I've already done 2 videos on those in the past, which I'll have linked in the description bar below, and I'll also have it in the card above. So if you want to check those out for further information, then please do so. But in this week's video, we'll be answering the question, should Catholics venerate the saints? So I think the first step to answering this question is to answer, what does venerate mean? Well, venerate simply means to regard with great respect, revere. Oftentimes, the word venerate gets attached to the word worship, which means something very different in this day and age. Worship today means, noun, the feeling or expression of reverence and adoration for a deity. Verb, show reverence and adoration for a deity, honor with religious rites. So although it may seem simple enough that one relates to a deity and another one relates to honoring a person, why is it that people combine the word venerate and worship? Well, it really comes down to the origin of the words and the way that the definitions have shifted over time. The word venerate comes from the Latin word venerare, which means to adore, to revere, or sometimes can even mean to worship. However, the Latin word venerare does not always mean worship. The word worship actually comes from Old English. It is derived from the Old English word worthscape, which means to acknowledge one's worth or worthiness. With understanding where the word worship comes from, we learn that the word worship from its origin did not always translate into worshiping a deity, but it just meant to recognize, acknowledge someone's worth. That definition of worship is very similar to the definition of venerate. So since the word worship has changed its meaning over time, the Catholic Church has actually made 2 words for 2 forms of worship. These 2 terms are latria and dulia. The term latria refers to worship to God, where the term dulia means to show veneration or honor to an individual such as a saint or an angel. With these 2 definitions of the words latria and dulia, we can see that when Catholics are venerating the saints and the angels, they are not worshiping them in the sense of how they worship God. Although this should be sufficient enough that the Catholic Church does not worship the saints in the way that they worship God, but they simply venerate them, the idea that Catholics venerate the saints still does not sit well with some people. When we venerate the saint, we're acknowledging what a life with God is like. We're recognizing God's grace. So before we move on, I think it'd be good to understand what a saint is. Well, a saint is a holy person who has devoted their life to God on earth, that they have lived their lives for God. Some people even died for God. When Catholics look to the saints, they are acknowledging a life devoted to God. And St. Paul actually teaches us in Scripture to imitate the lives of those individuals. So before moving ahead, I think it's important to go back to the terms latria and dulia. Now, the terms latria and dulia talk about the two forms of worship, which we just previously discussed, but oftentimes this still confuses people since we don't see people often using the words latria and dulia in their daily lives. So we've kind of condensed the words latria, dulia, and worship into two words, which are adore or adoration and honor. So the Catholics honor the saints, but they adore God. The term honor is a word that we are more familiar with. We use it more in our daily lives. So right now, I'm going to show you two verses where the word honor is used. And the word honor is the Greek word kabed in these two verses. However, these two verses have two different contexts which change the meaning of the word honor. So let us look at those two verses. The first verse we're going to look at is Proverbs 3:9. It says, "Honor the Lord with your wealth, with first fruits of all your produce." Here in this verse, we can see the teaching of honoring God. And the second verse is Exodus 20:12. "Honor your father and your mother, that you may have a long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you." In this verse, we can see the honor going to our mother and our father. The teaching of honoring our fathers and our mothers does not take away from the honor in which we give God. So clearly here we can see the distinction between two forms of honor. So does Scripture teach us to honor and venerate the saints? Yes, it does. Clearly in the verses I just showed you, it talked about honoring certain individuals, and that was our father and our mother. But Scripture also teaches us to honor individuals for the glory of God, and we're going to be looking at some verses right now. The first verse we're going to look at is Matthew 10:41. It says, "Whoever receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever receives a righteous man because he is righteous will receive a righteous man reward." This verse right here teaches us to receive a prophet, to recognize a prophet. And prophets were people who went on teaching about God, teaching the people, evangelizing people about God. So right here we see that we should recognize these individuals for the work that they do for God. Another verse we're going to look at is Matthew 15:4. It says, "For God said, 'Honor your father and your mother, and whoever curses father or mother shall die.'" Now, I mentioned this verse of honoring your father and your mother again because the Greek term here is not the Greek term kabed as shown in Exodus. The Greek term here is tima. Now, I mentioned this because someone may go like, oh, she's using two different Greek terms, so honor means a different thing here. Well, no, this verse right here is still teaching us to honor our father and our mother, reflecting on the Ten Commandments as we are taught in Exodus. And there are various times in Scripture where we are taught to honor individuals with this word tima. Verses such as Romans 13:7, 1 Timothy 6:1, 1 Peter 2:17, and 1 Timothy 5:17. So clearly here we can see the use of the word honor for showing to honor God, but also to honor individuals for the glory of God. So now that we can understand that honoring individuals and recognizing their worthiness and the lives that they live for God is actually taught in Scripture and is not condemned in Scripture, let us talk about the statues, because this comes up a lot when people talk about Catholics venerating the saints. They believe that the Catholic Church should not have statues of the saints. So Catholics usually respond to this by saying like, well, I have a statue just like how I have a photo of my grandma in my living room to help me remember her. Although, like I said before, this argument, this response should be sufficient enough, it still does not sit well with individuals because they believe it goes against the 10 Commandments as they were taught in Exodus. So let us look at the verse in Exodus where people believe that it is condemned to have a statue of a saint, and we're going to look to see if this verse is actually teaching that teaching. So Exodus 20 verse 4 through 5 says, "You shall not make for yourself any idol or likeness of anything in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, inflicting punishment for their ancestors' wickedness on the children of those who hate me, down to the 3rd and 4th generation." This verse right here is teaching against creating an idol, creating an image that would replace God, that they would bow down to as being their God. This verse right here is teaching against idolatry. It's not teaching against making a statue of anything. It's teaching against bowing down to that statue and treating it as their God. I find when people make this verse mean not making any statue, any painting, any drawing, anything of another person's image, they're missing the whole point of what God is teaching here. God is teaching against idolatry. He's teaching against worshiping someone before him, bowing down to something before him as though that is their God. That is what he's teaching against here. So let's say that this verse right here is teaching against the use of any image, any statue for anything, even if it's used for worship or liturgical uses, then it would actually contradict many verses in Scripture. Verses such as Exodus 25:18 through 20, where God instructed for there to be a cherubim to be created to help worship God. And in 1 Chronicles 28:18 through 19, where there's a further instruction of making a cherubim for the worship of God. So do these teachings of these two verses and many other verses in Scripture contradict the teaching in Exodus 20? They don't. Well, first of all, Scripture cannot contradict itself. So that means that that interpretation of Exodus 24 through 5, that any image created is against this teaching, is incorrect. God is not teaching about any image created. He is teaching against idolatry. So guys, I hope this video brought some clarification about the veneration of saints. Like I mentioned earlier, I do have videos about the saints already, which I'll have linked down below or in the card above. So please check those out if you haven't watched those already. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like me and you want to follow me in my journey, please hit that subscribe button. Also, please check out the other videos I have posted because maybe I've answered a question that you may have. But if I haven't already, please leave your questions and comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Bye-bye.